So my story happens in New York, and I was in New York. This is in 1989, and I'd been to New York a bunch of times at this point for business, and I was getting really comfortable with everything about New York. And I thought that day that when I was free in the evening, I might go see a Broadway play, and so I went to investigate what it costs to see a Broadway play. And at that point, in 1989, it was $120, I think, for a ticket. It was a big surprise to find out how impossible it would be to go to a Broadway play for me. And but I was undeterred. There were many things I could do in New York, and I had plans to see a couple movies that night and see a couple musical acts too. And so I'm walking down the street in the East Village, and a guy stops me. Well, he needs some help. He's a big older guy than me, and he says, "Help I," and he's from the West Indies, and he's speaking in patois, and it's hard to understand everything he's saying. But essentially, he tells me. He points to the policeman across the street and explains that cop was trying to help him find a place to stay because he just wants to find a place to sleep tonight because his brother was a window washer in the skyscrapers and he fell to his death, and he just came from the West Indies to claim his body, and he was at Port Authority, the bus station, earlier, and he left his wallet there because he was worried about being mugged. And then he pulls out this wad of paper and explains that he's got this $3,000 on him, and he puts it back in his pocket, and he just wants to get a room, and the cop sent him to the Y, and the Y said they wouldn't give him a room unless he's got some ID, so he's got to go back to Port Authority to get his ID, but he's worried he'll be mugged, which makes a lot of sense to me, and he wants to know if I would hold on to his $3,000 while he goes to Port Authority and gets his wallet and then comes back to wherever I am, if I would do him that favor. And I kind of go through all this in my head, and I'm also trying to verify whether I'm understanding him clearly too, because it's a hard dialect to understand. But I also feel really sorry for the guy, because I know what it's like to be scared about being mugged in New York. Like the first time I was there, I totally was scared all the time too. I was a teenager from Winnipeg, and I was visiting, and it was like really freaked me out. So I understand. I believe him, and I'm also thinking, well, he's really dumb. Like many people would steal from him. So it's like he's asked the only guy in the world who will give him back his $3,000. I don't know how he picked me out. So I go, yeah, okay, yeah, I will hold on to your $3,000 while you go get your wallet, and then you come back. But I'm going to a concert at this jazz club called Sweet Basil's, and I'm going to have to give you the address, and you'll have to come back there. And he's like, yeah, sure. And then he says, do you have any money of your own on you? I kind of feel like that's a fair question. I kind of feel like he should have asked that much earlier, but he's just trying to ascertain whether I'm, decent or ordinary. And I'm like, yeah, I do, and I have 5 20s in this pocket and a 50 in this pocket. And so he asks me to show him, just to prove that I got my own money. Reasonable request as far as I'm concerned. I show him a bit of the 50. Like, here's the $50 bill. And he's like, and then he says, would you wrap your money around my money while you're holding on to it? And I'm about 25 years old when this happens. And like 2 years earlier, like when I was 22 and 23, I worked full-time at a group home here in Toronto, and with women that were like between 15 and 21, and they were like psychiatrists and psychologists in our meetings and whatnot. And some of the women I worked with were also from the West Indies, and I remember they had I remember reports where we were told that some people came from backgrounds with a lot of superstition and things like that to be sensitive to. And I just thought, he wants me to wrap my money around his money. It's a cultural, superstitious thing. Like, yeah, it's just, I still don't lose my money. Like, yeah, so I'm okay, sure. So then he wants to go down this back alley for me to wrap my money around his money. And I thought, wow, he is so dumb. Like, and I said to him, no, we're not going to go down a back alley like that. Somebody could rob us, So he wants to go, so he just kind of, moves us towards an apartment building. We just, and we walk in, and his back is to the door, and my back is to the elevator, and he's like, okay, give me your money. And I give him the 50, and he takes the 50, and he takes his wad of his $3,000, and he puts my money around his money, he puts it in a brown paper bag, and it's like big, and he gives it to me, and I stick it in my pocket, and my pocket's sticking out a mile. And then we leave that apartment foyer, and he grabs a cab, and he gets into the cab, and he goes, go, go, go. And I kind of stop the cab driver. I'm like, wow, the guy doesn't even have the address of where he's going to meet me later. And I start to explain to the cab driver, well, he's going to Port Authority, this man, and then you're going to take him to this address. I give him Sweet Basil's, and they're gone. And I'm like, I can't believe my luck, you know? Like I then start walking, continuing walking on my way to the show, and like, you know, like this. And it's just, New York is just so surreal to me, you know, like who would have imagined that I would end up with like all this money, and I'm thinking the guy's kind of a loud character, and he might embarrass me when he comes in about an hour from now to the concert, and I give him his money, and I'm also very proud that I'm going to just like, it might even freak him out that I'm going to be there, and that I'm going to give him all his money, and so I thought I'll separate my money from his money, so that it's all just a quicker exchange, because, like I said, he's loud, and he might embarrass me. The concert might be a bunch of silent people listening. In fact, it will be. And so I take my money out of the paper bag, and there's just a wad of newspaper in there. And it takes me a little while to kind of do the math on what actually happened. And I'm really gutted. And I get back to the hotel that I'm staying at, and I call the police, you know, and it turns out the police have like more important things to do in New York than care about a guy that lost $50 to a con, and so we don't talk very long, me and the police. And the next day, I told some New Yorkers that I met about what had happened, and they told me, some of them told me that they knew the end of my story after I told them the first sentence. And it was a pretty amazing experience, you know, because like my whole take on life changed from that in terms of like realizing there's another angle to consider on almost all things that happen, that an angle that you might not have imagined also exists on many events. But I walked away from it thinking that what was truly incredible was that it cost less than half of what I would have spent to go to Broadway, and I saw like the most unreal performance art, front row, and got to risk my life. So that's that.